Hi, we're the Mona Lisa twins, and you're listening to Fab 4 Free for All.
And welcome to another edition of Fab 4 Free for All. I almost forgot our name for a second. The Beatles and Beatles related podcast on YouTube and on the internet, and we basically come to you whenever we can and bring you some up-to-date topics or some analysis or things going on in Beatle land. And joining me, as they always do, thankfully, are my two friends, Mr. Rob Leonard.
Good. Hello.
Good hello. And Mr. Mitch Axelrod.
Hey folks, how you doing?
What about like reasonable hello? How's that? Anyway.
And who are you?
I'm Tony Triguardo, and we are talking about today a film that upon your watching this may have been well, I guess you could be watching this 5 years after our recording, and it was released a long time ago. But as we are recording this, it is about to come out as a theatrical release, and there is also an intended DVD release. The film is called Daytime Revolution. It focuses on a period where John and Yoko were co-hosts of the Mike Douglas show. And the recordings were done, Mitch, again, that week of...
Well, it was aired the week of February 14th.
Right.
Of 72, but it was recorded over a period of a few weeks in January of 72.
Okay, so puts it in a little bit of perspective. It's called Daytime Revolution because, let's face it, this was kind of an unprecedented thing. Here was John and Yoko, politically active, two very politically active people who were coming on, and the deal was, now I had heard originally that they were to be given the choice of 50% of the guests or half the guests. I don't know if that's necessarily true. They don't really address that in the documentary, but
No.
It's very obvious that a number of the guests are John and Yoko's choice. They're people.
It seems like 80% or 90% of them are based
yeah.
on this doc. I mean, again,
based on this documentary, you know.
Right.
But you know what? I think part of it also is they didn't show everyone who was a guest.
Correct.
Right.
So
Correct.
that was.
That's why I said based on this doc, because there were others, and but they didn't feel it would help the narrative of their doc.
You sort of get like a little glimpse of Louis Nye sitting at the end of a a couch, and you don't actually hear them going, so Louis Nye was a guest, I mean, but
Like the Ruddles.
but you're right.
And Louis Nye.
And which does bring to mind, and we'll get to, we'll talk about the documentary. We also talked about a few things that we thought were absent. Rob, you brought up that you had a few things you observed that weren't.
Yep.
I have one thought that kind of involved Louis Nye that wasn't there.
Well, that's where mine is. That's where I think we're all in Louis Nye mode right now.
Yeah.
Tony,
Welcome to Fab 4 Free for All, a show about Louis Nye. Anyway,
yeah, not Bill Nye.
Not Bill Nye.
No, but Tony, you mentioned the Daytime Revolution. I think it's very apropos with the title, because Mike Douglas was on at 4:30 in the afternoon, daytime. Mm-hmm. You would never think to see John and Yoko in the daytime on a daytime talk
Nocturnal
show.
creatures, right?
Yeah, and also Revolution, obviously, because they're banking on the Beatles revolution and the fact that John and Yoko were trying to not start a revolution, but help the cause, so to speak.
Yeah. So
I think that's why they probably chose the name, but it's fine. It's actually a good title.
I think so. Yeah, Rob, what were you going to say?
I think Daytime Revolution's appropriate because, and I guess we start right now, because one thing that I thought they should have included, they included Attic Estate, which was a success. And but if you look at what talk shows he went on beforehand, it was Dick Cavett, it was stuff like that. That was a nighttime show, and it was a different show too. It was a different audience. It was a different host. Mike Douglas. Yeah. A lot of things were on cue cards for him. He admitted it even in the show. You even see it. So I think maybe that would have been a better starting point than when they started. But I understand why they did it. There's, it was a different show. If you think of, we don't Johnny Carson show is shown here in America on the Antenna TV channel, and you see some really dated stuff on there, which is great. And you don't see the Mike Douglas show for a long time. The last time we saw any of these shows was on VH1, and then they were also released on VHS. So it's just different to remember what was going on during that time. It's 50 years now, more than 50 years. And it's just totally different. You don't even realize it until you start watching it again. I'm like, oh my God,
Now bringing that up though, Rob, and it's true. Douglas definitely is working with cue cards.
For the most part,
That's what I was going to say. At one point, Yoko, sort of
Yoko
reads one of the cue cards. She's being playful, and Douglas at first gets a little defensive, but he gets it. He rolls with the joke a little bit, but. I do think that, do you guys agree? I thought that Douglas's way of following the way the conversation was going and bringing in unique questions and unique ideas, I thought he went off script enough he goes off script enough to make it interesting and make it meaningful.
No, I agree.
I would say, Tony, to that point, we should explain to our younger audience that Mike Douglas was a 51-year-old guy who basically catered to the older crowd, had a lot of interesting guests, just like Johnny Carson did and everybody else. But you're right. I think in this instance, and there are talking head interviews, so to speak, of his producer and some of the guests. But I think when you watch this, he definitely goes off cue card a lot. Not even more than you had just said. And the one thing I loved about this documentary is that when, if you watch these shows back in 72, like I did, I was 10, I just wanted to see John and Yoko. I didn't care about anything else. And I didn't even like when they sang because I didn't get all this Attic State stuff and Sisters Oh Sisters. But now, when you're a little older, and even if you're watching when you're younger, this brings into context a lot because Mike really listened to John and Yoko. He wasn't one of these, like, Jack Parr guys who rolled his eyes at guests and said, oh,
yes.
Okay. He really was
respect. There was
very much respect in this whole week because, this was a week of John and Yoko bringing on guests that probably would never have been on Mike Douglas's show.
Bingo. And would never have been on any other daytime television.
Not daytime, right. Maybe some
well, I don't know if they would have hit
access or
public. I don't know if they would have hit, even Merv Griffin, later in the evening.
But that's the point. I mean, Mike went off script enough and was so respectful of John and Yoko and all the guests. He tried everything, and we'll get into a whole bunch of stuff, but he did that enough where I think John, and it even states it, John was very comfortable. And a lot of, don't forget, the Beatles had just broken up. Yoko was still the dragon lady, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And he gave her a lot of respect. And
he gave her a lot of respect, even to the point where there's a really nice segment. I don't think I'm quote giving away anything, but there's a really nice segment where after Yoko's performance of Sisters Oh Sisters, and she like unrolls the lyric, like obviously the song was very recently written.
Yeah, because it didn't
probably not recorded yet. Yeah, and probably not even recorded yet in the studio version. And she unrolls like she does the song. Mike comes over and there's like a genuine bit of warmth between him and Yoko. He puts his arm around her more or less, like at the end of the piece, and gives her like a and you see she's very like, wow, yeah, that went over really nicely, and that's a cool moment. It's not sort of, this is John's thing and yeah, she's along for the ride. I think he developed So
well, one thing about the intros though, where they say John Lennon and his wife Yoko Ono, You
But
know,
that was
so
1972.
yeah, I
And,
know
and
that,
you know,
but
yeah, you have
that's
to put it in
part of it too,
perspective.
though. So
Yes,
That's very
yes.
true. I mean, really,
Yeah.
I mean, by that point, you really could have probably just gotten away with John and Yoko, just,
yes,
Yes.
yes,
which I think, doesn't he do that by like maybe the third or fourth
I think he
day?
does.
I
He
think
doesn't
he
always
just
intro
does.
her as the wife.
Here's John and Yoko. But
Yeah.
you're right though. I think in the intro, and of course our special guest, John Lennon and his wife Yoko Ono.
yeah.
That's
So
kind of funny.
Yeah, but I think we should also say that when John and Yoko came on, I mean, the purpose of their whole week was to share the movement. Now, when people hear the word movement, you think, oh my goodness, power to the people, right on, and that wasn't the case here. I took away from this, and I'm glad I watched this. I took away that the John and Yoko were on to educate people, and this is what I think the movement is. And John says it sort of, you'll interpret however he says it, but I think he did it to educate people enough to give them the tools to be better people, and then you can make decisions on your health, on voting, on whatever to help the world. And
That's well
and I
put.
think
That's well
that
put.
was
Yeah.
the movement. But you know what? When they first talk about the movement, you sort of get turned off because you don't know how it's going to go, especially knowing that during the week, he had Bobby Seale on and all these people who were, not exactly what they were household names, but not in a great way. A lot of times they brought on negative connotation.
Absolutely. And there's one aspect of the Bobby Seale appearance, which here's Bobby Seale, who we should put in context. Bobby Seale was the head of the Black Panther movement at the time, and was often thought of as being who were also often thought of as being a violent group, which Bobby Seale tries to, explain that that's not true at all. But if you think about it, like what Bobby Seale's talking about, and in some of the clips that they're showing, he's kind of preaching a form of socialism at 4:30 in the afternoon. He's
Yes.
talking about, we are talking about freedom, parentheses, the movement, freedom. But he's saying, well, what about free medicine? What about free food? What
Right.
about free? That's a socialistic economy in a way, which whoa, 4:30 in the afternoon, but it's presented in such a way, and you've even got like the director, the producer of the film, who's or the co-producer of the film, associate producer Evie DeMassa, saying Mike and Bobby Seale already had known one another before John and Yoko insisted on were asked to bring Bobby in. So somehow Mike Douglas, 51-year-old Mike Douglas, and Bobby Seale, the head of the Black Panthers, knew one another already. Interesting.
It's weird also because when I think of the Black Panther movement, I had no idea.
I think of this. I think of the fist in the air, the fist in the air and the black glove. That's all you think.
When he was talking, and forget about the socialism aspect of it, just he was very soft spoken,
very soft spoken, very smart,
and he didn't come off well. I think he did that on purpose because, you come on and you're all, then people don't take you seriously,
right?
Especially this crowd. Right. But it does say, and it doesn't say this in the doc. It said it in the press release that there were some contentious moments during filming because they were all worried about Bobby Seale coming on, and
of course,
and people like Jerry Rubin that they had on also.
And there's a great speaking of moments of contention. There's a great Nobuko Miyamoto talks about a very contentious moment during filming,
right?
Which is I think is a brilliant part of the documentary.
Yeah, which we won't give away.
Yeah. No,
and we should also say that they, John and Yoko, for the people in the doc that they chose to show to further the movement, they were a weird eclectic group. They were macrobiotic, chefs. There were people working with brain waves, but every one of them came off so well spoken that none of them came off like really like people who you would think, oh my God, these people are absolutely freaking nuts.
Well, they were normalized on that show or those shows.
Bingo.
That was a great way to say it.
And that's what I think John and Yoko were trying to do. And they, more than say it in the movie too, that they would try, John we all know John loved advertising. He's talked about good morning comes from, a Kellogg's commercial.
Yeah.
But I think he was trying to say, okay, I'm in the door, I'm in the thing. Okay, you follow me, and just act normal is the wrong word, but just try to win over the people watching.
Right.
And I think, you think back about it, they did, but it was only
Very
for a
well,
week.
yeah.
That's
Very well.
the bad part about it.
It's only for a week, but think about it though, Rob. They talk about the idea of they're using the term daytime revolution. And what does
Right.
revolution mean? It means that, it's hopefully going to cause some kind of a domino effect. And if you think about all of that fringe stuff that they're talking about has normalized macrobiotic food,
Yes.
biofeedback.
Yep.
It has all become so normalized,
Eating good food,
Yeah.
and that's true. And the stuff does normalize. It just takes time to get there. You want it to happen in 2 weeks, and it
Right.
maybe took 25 years to get there. Now, the
Right.
thing about it, there are stores where you can go and buy these types of food that they're talking about in the cooking segment, where it's like, oh look, I don't have to drive 20 miles. It's right down the street.
Right there.
Well, that's it. That's Trader Joe's. I mean,
right. Trader Joe's, Whole Foods, right? Whole paycheck. I mean, Whole Foods.
All of the people pushing plant-based diets is macrobiotic diet.
Yeah. Although, okay, Rob.
Oh, go ahead. No, go ahead. I was going to
No,
say,
I mean, what happens is it changes. The name. No one says microbiotic anymore. They say plant-based. They say vegetarian. Things change along the way. The name changes.
Yeah, but
the concept is still the same.
And
yes,
and the taste is much better because I
No,
mean,
right.
in all seriousness, and again, you just think of one little thing, but the expression on Mike Douglas's face when he eats the prepared macrobiotic piece.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, you can see Mike's not really ready for what's going down there.
Yeah, Mike was like, "We'll take a break." And
we'll take a break now. But
he was also doing what talk show hosts do.
Yes.
Like when Johnny Carson would have the monkey on, and then he runs away. It's part of the act, and I think the food was the same thing with Mike Douglas.
Yeah, but but
I do agree with you.
Mike was very respectful because Mike, when they were doing the biofeedback stuff with brainwaves and how you can, basically help your body by figuring out the brainwaves. Mike had it on his head too. I mean, the whole the get up, and so he actually. What I was trying to say earlier was that if John and Yoko were doing it and just going home or whatever they were doing, everybody in the audience might have went, "That's just John and Yoko being John and Yoko." But the fact that Mike joined in, and that actually said to them, "Well, he's trying it, so maybe it's not as crazy." I'm going to say crazy, and I don't mean that. Maybe it's not as far fetched as
it's not as fringe. It's not as fringe as we may.
Yeah, he's trying it. He's trying to make it sound normal. And as far as your point, Rob, with John saying, leading the way, I think that's a great point because you can tell that when they stumble in whatever they're saying, a lot of times John picks up the conversation and tries to explain it very lucidly, very intelligently. I mean, not like, he was just John. I love John during this week because he was so uncomfortable that he was comfortable, if that makes sense. He became much more comfortable during the week, as you could see, but he was so into it and
sober, lucid, smart, really
smart,
digging into a combination of the intellectual and the artist side.
Yes,
are both part of John.
The Mike Douglas. Mike Douglas was Mike Douglas. You can't help that. He's the main man. But sitting next to him, I know John and Yoko, and this is not anything against Yoko because she was just as good during the week. She really was, and we'll get into that.
Yeah.
But you can tell that John was the quote other real host that was, helping the guest along because co-host. Yeah, but he was the other guy. Like it could have been the John Lennon show for a week, and without Mike Douglas, and John was very comfortable doing that role. Because he was furthering their agenda, and it wasn't their agenda.
He also ripped up the the Lennon remembers John during that week.
Yes.
He also really shreds the Jan Wenner Lennon remembers interview. The only thing that is brought up from that is the genius quote that comes up from the
But
Lennon
he
remembers.
explains that.
And he
Yes.
explains it, and he explains it well, and he explains,
Yes.
but I mean, I don't know. Let me know if you, but I think that this shows, I think, a much more well-rounded John Lennon than we had been. The very last big public sighting of John would have been that horrible interview. Would have been Lennon Remembers, would have been the last big, like, oh, this is what we know John is up to these days. And one-to-one.
Yeah, but that was one-to-one was later. The thing about with John and Mike Douglas, when Mike Douglas asked him about his father, how many people have ever asked about John Lennon's father?
Correct.
In a regular interview? No one.
Yes.
And to me, that I forgot that Mike Douglas had asked that, and the way he asked it was so natural in
genuine
the way he talked about it, and I was very impressed with John's answer. First of all, it was very honest, as it always would be.
Not mean-spirited.
It wasn't, but at the way Mike Douglas asked it, and one of the things about these shows, they were done one a week for 5 weeks. I often wonder what would have happened if it was done the way they normally did it, one a day for 5 days in a row.
That's a good thought, Rob, actually.
And because it seems like different. The first show, they were trying to figure out, okay, what's going to happen here. And then by the rest of the shows, they seem to like each other. And I think that really helped the whole 5 days, and how these people came on who you normally don't expect to see on any of these shows. And it was made more accepting. It was just, and I give Mike Douglas a lot of credit. A lot of people knock him, but he was good with this. He was
really good. And even like the body language, if you look, the body language, by the time you get to that 4th or 5th show, that first show, John is leaning back a little bit. There's kind of like he does lean in every once in a while, but by the 4th show, like he's leaning in. He's connecting with Douglas in a very one-on-one type way. And no disrespect meant to Yoko. Yoko's in the middle of the two of them.
Right.
Which is okay, and he's not like, dissing Yoko, but
not at all.
He's leaning in to acknowledge, Douglas directly, which is cool.
Well, but also he doesn't want to block Yoko. So the first day, I think that was very much on his mind, because if he leans over, he blocks Yoko.
Yeah.
And part of this is also, just getting Yoko out there too. Think about it. She hadn't done a lot of things with, interviews type of things, where John had done, hundreds and maybe thousands by then. Who knows?
Yeah.
So there was a lot of things going on for this week. It wasn't just the guests; it was John Lennon also, and Yoko Ono.
And talking about the guests and talking about Yoko, and again, I don't want to give anything away, but I do want to mention this.
Tony, before you do one thing, I want to bring up something from before, because I think it's important. You were talking about John being clean, sober, intelligent, smart. I do have one thing to say. If John had looked, and again, I know this is appearances.
I go ahead.
But if John had looked like he looked in 1969 with the long hair, with the beard and mustache, even though he was clean and sober and everything and speaking intelligently, I think it would have come off differently. John looked, I'm going to say like a Beatle, and I don't mean it like that. You know what I mean? He had shorter hair. He looked great every day dressing. He looked, when I say human and normal, you know what I mean? I'm not, I just mean if he looked like
he didn't look like a fringe character.
He didn't look like a freakish character who people would right away say, I'm not listening to you because you look like that.
Right. He didn't look like he was on the fringe. He didn't
Correct.
come out there looking like he was going to start a revolution.
No, right. And I
He
think
came
that's
out
very
there
important.
looking like he wanted to be an everyman
And
that he
taken
was an
seriously.
everyman and
Taken
taken
seriously.
seriously.
Yeah.
He had mutton chops going on, but hey, you
Yeah,
know.
but that's different. Mutton
Yeah.
chops are different than like long
Absolutely.
greasy hair with,
Yeah.
Well,
you know.
you know who had the look of John Lennon 1969 is George Carlin.
George Carlin.
But
Yeah.
he looked well kept though.
Yeah, clean cut. He had the
clean cut. He had it in a
ponytail.
ponytail, and
Yeah.
so he didn't come out, you know, with his hair like he had in concert. But
Right.
so
Right.
he also
Right.
was like, you know, he wanted to be taken seriously. He also
Yeah.
was amazing. But
Yeah.
go ahead. Sorry.
But
Tony.
no, what I was going to say was that keep an eye out, because I think an important moment, and let me know if you agree with this, but when it comes to Yoko contributing in a way that is intelligent and pointed, the scene with Ralph Nader, the day when Ralph Nader is a guest and Ralph Nader is talking about a pamphlet that he's distributing, Yoko makes a very, very pointed piece of commentary that is lucid, and Mike makes a joke to respond, which is taken in good humor by all,
Including John, yeah.
including John. But she makes Nader sit up and take notice. Not that Nader was dismissing of Yoko in any way at all, but Yoko's point at 4:30 in the afternoon to the audience she's talking to is very, very, very wise.
Well, we should
So-
bring up Yoko in general on this show because, as Rob said, you know, Yoko's never been on these things.
Right.
The world sees her again as the Dragon Lady. They have no idea. They see her as John Lennon's wife.
And this is also, and I'm just throwing this in because, you know, I have my feelings. People may know, listen to our show or watch our show regularly. I am a fan of a lot of the music.
Right.
As far as the person, I have likes
There
and
are
dislikes.
mixed feelings. That's all.
Mixed feelings, especially later on, the May Patton era, things like that. But we're talking about now.
A specific time.
71, a very specific period.
72, yeah.
And 72, yeah. And you know, people's insecurities of what happens to them later in their life notwithstanding.
Right. So,
you know,
in that regard, you know, she comes off, and maybe it's the doc, you know, again, we don't watch all the hours.
No, we've seen the whole episodes.
Right,
Rob, you've watched them. You've seen them.
But
I saw them when VH1 aired them, yeah.
Yeah.
But she comes off a lot more intelligent and just worldly than the image that she had been given, so to speak, the stereotype that she had been given. And John doesn't really stop her at all. He adds to her stuff, and as you'll see, he does give her a few jives, you know, which very friendly husband stuff.
Yes,
and it's just man and wife stuff. It's not like.
But it also, Rob, I forgot the word that you used earlier. It also humanizes Yoko. It also normalizes Yoko's art, because you know he makes a comment that we all would make.
If we're talking to our wives or spouses,
right, or if we're just talking
anybody,
or talking about, you know, modern art in general, you know, whatever. But his way of delivering it is sort of a wink to all of us to just say, all right,
me too.
We're good.
I got you. Me too. I don't know.
Yeah, I got me too.
So it is. I think she comes off really well. Now we do have to talk about the elephant in the room. You know, the whole Chuck Berry performance.
Yeah, I was going to get to that. Yeah.
All right, go ahead.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Well, no, it's okay. I think, you know, the one thing that I think was lacking a little bit from the documentary, and this is not meant to slam on Yoko, but the one thing that I thought was missing from the documentary is, and this isn't giving anything away because this is a meme and this is notorious in Lennon world, but you know, John and Chuck Berry, John is meeting one of his idols for the first time, gets to play with Chuck Berry, who is so Chuck Berry throughout. For better or for worse. Those of you listening on audio did not see my Dean Martin eye roll on that one. But I think, you know, Chuck, they're in the middle of Memphis, the song Memphis, and Yoko is playing percussion. She's playing like a handheld conga or tabla type drum. And then she takes the mic off the stand and starts to, as John says, do her thing all over you. You know, like does her yelling, you know, her Yoko yelling. And you see Chuck Berry's eyes just go Google. I mean,
Yeah.
And that's become a
momentarily.
meme.
And that has become a meme. And I don't mean Google the search engine. I mean he goes Google guide, you know.
He's like, what the hell is that?
What the hell is that? You know. The documentary shows it, but it isn't talked about. Now, that may just be the idea that, okay, you know what, we're gonna just let it go. We know it happened, and that's the deal, and we're gonna just let it go. Or it's the idea that they don't want to put anything antagonizing or negative about Yoko. My only comment there is that it's out of context. Yoko's behavior there, my feeling is, was out of context in comparison to how she is during the rest of the week. I don't know if it was insecurity. I don't know if maybe there's a touch of selfishness for
Explain that,
Yoko.
though.
Yoko knows that her husband is meeting one of his idols. Yoko knows that
First time.
that they're performing a song together. No, in Yoko's world, Memphis is not what it is in John's world, of course, meaning the song. But for Yoko to interject like that was what maybe she was trying to, she thought John was nervous or upset, and maybe she wanted to bring a little humor, or she wanted to make
No.
John feel like, oh, Yoko's here. But it is and was a little, my opinion anyway, a little bit of an unusual moment, especially considering how give and take the whole rest of the week is. And how, I won't say well behaved. That's putting Yoko in a box, and that's not right.
Well,
What I mean is
in a bag.
in a bag.
In a
But
bag, yeah.
but Yoko is very respectful toward, you know, the establishment and towards what else is going on and towards the other things happening throughout. And that's an odd moment that's not addressed in the doc.
I think
Well,
I think it's not addressed because number one, like you said, Tony, they don't want to do anything antagonistic. She's so good during the rest of the week. Why bring that in? But I will say, and we talked about it off mic, if Chuck Berry was alive and had been interviewed,
yes, yeah,
he may have given some. I don't know. I've never heard any. I've never researched interviews with Chuck. He may have discussed it later on at some point, and maybe maybe they could have found that if it even happened. But I think he would have been the one to speak to that because John obviously didn't care. But you're right. It's a little odd because the first time and she has to do it, but by the end of the song, her mic's off anyway.
They're turning her mic off. Yeah.
So.
Yeah, they lowered it really. They because she screamed again, and it was it was. I remember not being there, but then when I was watching the doc, it's like, oh, it was there a little bit. I always thought, looking at that part of the show, first of all, their version of Memphis was very hesitant.
Yeah,
they did better with Johnny Be Good, and I'm surprised that they didn't go back and say, hey, you want to re-record that? Just because. They were so nervous. And one thing about what we know about Chuck Berry, he comes in, he doesn't practice. He might change the key on you. I was
going to say probably change the key.
Yeah, so you would think that okay, maybe we can do it one more time. I'm sure that they wouldn't have minded, but I that's maybe what I would have done with that scene because I look back and I think everyone knows. Excuse me, everyone knows that picture with Chuck with his eyes, but it's so short in real time that it's when you watch it, you're not like, oh, but when you see the picture, that's what everyone talks about because they haven't seen the show.
Yes.
So,
but to your point, Rob, everybody talks about that 1 second eye
Yeah.
But nobody talks about the really inferior performance of Memphis.
Yes. No, that's what I'm watching this, and I hadn't seen it in a while. I'm like, boy, you can tell that they're trying to figure out where to sing.
Right.
Poor John is trying, and John,
Trying to harmonize.
think about, what are the harmonies between John and Paul and John and Rand, John and anybody. And here's John trying to harmonize with Chuck Berry, and
Chuck's
Chuck
all
is
over the
just
place.
singing this monotonish long distance information.
Yeah.
And
it's hard to
John
get there.
doesn't know what the hell to do with this.
Right.
No, you're right. Yeah, it
tough.
was a and you're right. They should have maybe focused on it just for a minute, because they focused on a lot of other things. But I understand why they skipped over it, because they skipped over some other things too. So
yeah, and we may want to point out something that I've not brought up yet is Mitch mentions Chuck Berry. We talk about George Carlin, who have both left this plane of existence. But interestingly, and to their credit, the producers were able to find most of the other guests who are still with us, which is great.
Yeah.
It's 50 years later. And not only is it kind of cool because they found these people, but they also find them, and when they first present them during the documentary, I thought it was clever. At first I thought, why'd they do that? And then you realize how clever it is. They put the age that person was
Yes.
during the week of the broadcast. It puts into perspective that these people were in their 20s. They were
And never on a TV like
groundbreaking people in their field doing what they did. I also found the only thing I find a little bit unusual is they include Vivian Reed, who is wonderful singer, wonderful gospel singer, who was Mike's choice.
Yes.
As a guest, because they talk about and she is still with us. She contributes a couple of lovely points about how being on the show affected her personally. But I don't remember from the full episodes whether or not she has any real direct interactions with John and Yoko. So I'm glad that she's there, because she, especially in the closing, she makes some very lovely comments, and she's wonderful just to watch,
Yeah.
But she was one of Mike's people.
Yeah, Mike said that she opened for him in Vegas.
Yeah.
So I think it's cool that she's there. I appreciate her presence. I appreciate, maybe it's to just show that, hey, Mike could pick some hip, cool people too, for this week. And he did often. But, he picked a cool person to include in this week of Bobby Seale. And I mean, she was saying herself in the doc, and where oh my God, Bobby Seale. Like I was in the room with Bobby Seale. Whoa.
But she also, you know what? And I'll give this little tiny thing away. And all of them said this, but she especially, she said, I was not only in the room with Bobby Seale, I was in the room with John Lennon and Yoko Ono.
Yes.
I mean, and all of them said that, but she was really ecstatic about it. But I think he might have brought her on because he says, she could sing opera, she could sing this, and he says to John and Yoko, and this is the only thing I'll say that is in the doc that we're giving away, so to speak. He does say to them, I think you'll really like her. She can do all this. So I think he brought it up because, it's still a variety show, and it takes away the tension. And when I say tension, the maybe anticipated tension of having a Bobby Seale,
a Jerry Rubin,
Rubin.
Right, Jerry Rubin, who is also not with us any longer.
Right. And you know what, Rob, you said something before when I wanted to bring it up, and now I'm going to, because we just mentioned Jerry Rubin. When Mike asks John about his dad, Mike asks Jerry Rubin about his upbringing, which nobody really has ever come close. And Jerry Rubin, again, I'm not going to tell you what he says, but he looks at him like, is this a joke? And Mike's like, no, I really want to. This is the part I loved about
because the audience laughs a little bit.
Correct.
And Mike
I'm not going for a
that.
laugh. Right. I'm not going for a laugh. I want to know about your upbringing, because he probably would never have had Jerry Rubin on that show. but to have him on because John wanted him, and then to really go off cue card and just say, hey, tell me about your upbringing, because obviously that's important to who you are now.
Yeah, no, it's
and that was so, I thought, wow, that was pretty astute of Mike Douglas to do.
I thought bringing on Ralph Nader was important too. Because he was the guy who took down a whole car. Unsafe at any speed. So to me, it was good to see Nader. If you get that, he was only 37 at the time. You think he's older because everyone just looked older then.
Right.
Yeah, but he was. It's weird because he comes on and he looks like the establishment, so to speak. He's got his suit on, but he is very, he is so, when I say on John's side, I don't mean it like that because there's no sides, but he really does, make a difference and want to make a difference. And he listens to Yoko, he listens to John, and even though he's quote the older guy, he's still like part of the movement. And I thought that was important to have him on. Yeah.
He was a different part of the movement.
Correct.
He was the more organized,
right?
This is going to take time type of thing, where maybe Bobby Seale and Jerry Rubin, wanted it done faster. And it does, like we said earlier, it takes time, and things become regular after a while, but it takes time to get there.
Yeah.
There's a great line in the press release that I had looked at where Nader is talking about the appearance, and he says, John and Yoko recognized with all the money they made and all the acclaim that there was something missing, and that was improving the conditions on the ground where people work and raise their families around the world. I think that's one reason why they engaged so well on the Mike Douglas show. And here's the point. Mike was supposed to deliver advertising revenue, but I think deep in his heart, he wanted to do much more. He was a very sensitive person, and he had a great talent in introducing levity when people got too serious or too complex, just to keep the audience watching.
Right. That's a great point.
Astute point on Ralph Nader's part. And to me, I think representative of the whole week. Rob, you had mentioned that there were some things that you felt were missing. So what were your, I brought up.
First of all, I was happy we got two whole songs in there. We got Sisters Oh Sisters,
which was done very well, on
acoustic guitar, and him singing along on some of the verses.
She did it very well.
Yeah, and she didn't crack her voice or anything.
No.
She didn't
try to do the whole Yoko act, so to speak.
Yeah. And of course, Imagine sounded fantastic. And you wish the woman, the singer, or Vivian Ross, her name is
Reed.
I'm sorry. I want her to do a John Lennon album now. You know what?
Wow, that's cool.
That's a great
right now.
Right now, like she's, first of all, she was singing during her current part, where she is now, and her voice sounds fantastic.
Brilliant.
Yeah, and she said that Imagine was one of her favorite songs. So I want her to do a John Lennon.
Mitch, call her.
I will. I know you don't think I'm going to.
No, I know.
I already looked her up, by the way, to try to get her on the show. But
but I also thought, you want more music, and you didn't get it. Also,
we know why, though. There might have been.
Yes, I know why, because
and also too, Rob, think about it. You were talking, we were really focusing earlier on that idea of the movie being called Daytime Revolution. The music, is the songs he chose to do on Mike Douglas probably are the least revolutionary things that although then again, no, I'm wrong. He does do Luck of the Irish on the Douglas show. So that's
my other
true.
problem I have with the movie is they, to go from one day to another, they had like this bumper.
Yes,
and
we talked about it, Rob.
I look at the bumper and then I realize this could have been probably longer, just using the bumper, because that's what you do in television. You have a bumper like that, then you go to a commercial, or you come back from the commercial with the bumper.
Right.
And that's what got me. I'm watching this. I'm a TV guy. I work in television. I know with these bumpers, they used to use them a lot more. And I'm like, okay, this to me means I'm watching a show that doesn't have commercials in it instead of a movie.
Which Mitch was saying that it sort of brought it sort of, which I didn't agree or disagree with what Mitch was saying, but Mitch felt it cheapened it a little bit.
A little bit.
And took it out of the theatrical realm and made it like an aborted TV show or something like that.
Well, I don't think it cheapened it, but it seemed like they didn't know how to go from one day to the other.
Right.
And they maybe should have came up, they were using the clips from different TV newscasts, which I thought by the end of the movie didn't belong.
They were a little superfluous. It was cool because it did. Think about it though, Rob. For those who are historically challenged,
right? Which is a lot of people.
You're an American history person.
I am.
So, and all of us appreciate American history. But for those who may not, for really young people who know these things happen but don't know the chain of events, it was probably wise to give some form of context.
But you know what? I think I agree with Rob now that I'm hearing him say it, because even though they gave context, it didn't really give context to the week.
No, that's true.
It just gave context to the era. But
well, it gave context to what else, because you got to remember the Vietnam War was the first war to be shown in prime time.
Yes.
So
that part, yes,
it gave you a little bit, and don't forget, Watergate was on, and Watergate was all over television. I mean, not at
that point. Watergate hadn't started yet. It was about to.
But I'm just saying, but Nixon's presence was just felt constantly in the media. I remember being a little kid and being like, oh my God, this Nixon guy's everywhere. Like his name was constantly on the news.
But it wasn't like the assassination of Kennedy. And then you had, and then this was on the week after, where maybe the whole mood of the week would have been different because of what happened in the news.
Right.
I don't think what John and Yoko were trying to convey as the movement would be any different at all, other than maybe Bobby Seale's appearance. Other than that, I don't think anything they showed really had anything to do to lessen or further what John and Yoko's agenda was. That's
true. That's true.
That's a good point, Mitch. And one of the things that I got is a lot of these documentaries we see are usually like 90 minutes. For some reason, there's a automatic cutoff point. This is about an hour and 44 minutes. So there's a little bit more, and that's where those news clips come in and stuff like that. And of course, the one more thing that I was looking forward to, Louis and I, when they call up, when they call up people and they tell people they love them.
The phone calls. Yes,
yeah.
Rob, you hit it on the head. That's the one. For those of you who, and I don't know how much of this is present on YouTube. Again, if you're watching this in 2024, this episode, or in 2029, whatever, I don't know how much of it is on YouTube. But the scene that Rob is talking about is Yoko asking them to just randomly pick names out of the white pages and to call people and tell them that they love them. And what's beautiful and what's wonderful and what's so much fun is that Mike and Louis and I, they're playful, they joke, but Yoko stuff is meant to be playful. That's some
I also think they didn't put it in because I think people were maybe going to misinterpret it. I think that might be part of it, because some people are going to be laughing for the wrong reasons.
Yeah, but I think also they didn't put it in because I don't think that segment, what they're trying not to do here, because it's 108 minutes or whatever it is, Rob, I don't think they wanted to recap the Mike Douglas week.
Right, and I understand that part, and that's why when you watch, that's why it's called Daytime Revolution, not a week with John and Yoko.
Correct.
Well, I'm going to subject you all to the the John Lennon-y, cloudy, hey man, what's more revolutionary than love, man?
Professor
I mean,
Torquato has spoken.
Well, listen, they do.
no, but I mean, seriously though, Rob, I mean,
No, I agree. I agree.
That's why I think that bit could have and should have been in the movie, because what's here they are, they're talking about a daytime revolution, and you didn't have, this is going out to, starched collar America. This is the period where, dads aren't necessarily running and hugging their kids all the time, and here's Yoko telling people, why don't we call some strangers and tell them we love them? There's some
I agree.
aspect to that.
But there's also a certain funniness to it, because of Louis Nye. Louis Nye looked a little uncomfortable at one point doing it. Like, why am I doing this? But at the same time, he went along with it.
Yeah.
So, and plus, it's Louis Nye. It's not like it's Milton Berle or something. No one knows who Louis Nye is. He didn't have a TV.
What did Louis Nye do? Folks, put in the comments, what did Louis Nye actually do that I'm kidding.
He's the Joey Bishop of his time.
The Joey Bishop.
Let me ask you a question, though, a real serious question. What was George Carlin's role in this doc? And hear me out. They brought him on. They talked to him for a few minutes. He explains his appearance. Other than that, what part of the movement is he?
That was the purpose, Mitch. The purpose for me, George Carlin's presence in the film was to talk about the idea that the quote revolution was already spreading. Carlin had started his life and career as a mainstream performer.
Understood.
So what you had there was the flip side. You didn't have the conversion of someone who had been radical, who then copped out, sold out, bought a suit, and became part of the establishment. You had someone who had essentially dropped out of the establishment to join the movement.
But there's no comedy there. Like, what I'm saying, they maybe could have put Louis Nye and that whole bit as the comedic portion.
I think that
George Carlin's not. I mean, he did more than that on the show.
Absolutely, but I think that would have been out of place. I think having George Carlin there to explain the change in his life
by the transformation,
but also more important than him doing his stand-up.
But also they talked about personal change as part of the thing, and Carlin maybe is, out of everyone who was on that show, had the most personal change, because he was the straight ahead comedian, and then he becomes commentator from the left. From the anti-war movement, and the guy with the long hair, and the AM/FM guy, the
hippy dippy guy,
yeah. So I think that was part of it. I'm sure there's a clip of George Carlin talking about being on the show.
Probably.
But they didn't use it, and they didn't use any outside clips,
right,
of anyone talking about their time on it. They had to do the
other than the current talking head.
Right.
Right.
So, and I think the Carlin thing was that, here's a change, and they did talk about personal change as well as societal change. So
absolutely. Yeah. And we should probably note a couple of people of great import, and we've talked and referred to, but to give them the credit where credit is due, Evie DeMassa is featured in the film as a talking head, and he was the associate producer of the Douglas Show, 24th time of the broadcast. But he's prevalent in the movie, putting it into some perspective. I think very well, very eloquently. The director of the film is Eric Nelson, the producer Amy Briamonte. We mentioned Nobuko Miyamoto, who was one half of the duo Yellow Pearl. I don't know if they tried to reach Chris Iijima. I don't know whether or not he is still with us. But they show Yellow Pearl's performance.
She does say,
yeah, she does refer to him.
She does say yes in the past tense.
He was right.
He was right.
Personally, my feeling is, I stepped away from the documentary with a deep appreciation of Yellow Pearl's appearance that I didn't have the times when I watched it on DVD. I think I listened and sort of went, oh, this is a okay song. I don't think for some reason I focused on the words this time.
Yeah,
And I
well,
thought it was very
because the
important.
context.
The context.
If they
Ralph
would have just
Nader,
come on and said, here's Yellow Pearl,
yeah,
and you just heard them sing, you would have been like,
Yeah.
all right, they sang a song about
yeah,
change, but you didn't really, you wouldn't have listened, but because she was there to tell that very poignant story, which
Yeah.
we're not going to give away, but I think that helped.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
should also talk, Tony, about.
Well, let me just get through. I just
Oh,
want to get
sorry.
through some of the other folks. So
Sorry.
Ralph Nader, we mentioned.
Yep.
The macrobiotic chef, Hillary Redleaf, still with us, did also a talking head clip. Vivian Reed, we've talked about how brilliant she is. David Rosenboom is an avant-garde musician, but also directly involved in working with the synthesizers and things like that. In the
Biofeedback.
film, in his current incarnation, he's sitting with a grand piano, but or I don't know, maybe a baby
Yeah.
grand, but don't let that fool you in terms of what happens later in the film where David
Right.
Rosenboom is involved. Gary Schwartz is a biofeedback engineer, Harvard associate professor in the film. So it really is a fascinating cross section of people. It really is. So
Yeah,
what were you going to say?
I was going to say we should tell people that in Mike Douglas's memoir, it does say that the producers asked John and Yoko back. They said we should do it again sometime in the future. And in 1980, they asked them to be back. They were doing a series of shows in Hawaii, and John and Yoko declined because of everything going on with Double Fantasy. But that would have been very interesting. I'm not going to speculate, but it would have been very interesting to see the more less radically influenced John and more, dad and family man John on the Mike Douglas show. 8 years later, that would have I would have loved if he would have said yes. Because it would
But
have
the only
been
thing that
really
would have
cool.
screwed them up is that Mike would have opened that week with Yesterday, and that would have thrown the whole thing
Instead of
right
Michelle.
instead of Michelle, which John wrote the middle eight.
No, you know what would have been really
but-
cool? If Mike Douglas would have opened up with like Power to the People.
Hey, who knows? Mike might have opened up with Beautiful Boy. I mean,
Yeah, I know.
That would have been, what, the girl in my life. What was the name of the song?
Oh my God, yeah, the man in my little girl's life.
Yeah, so Beautiful Boy would have been actually very good.
Wow.
I wanted to bring up a point about the fact that the week they did this, and the week it aired, if this was 3 months earlier, 3 months later, I don't think it has the same effect, because the election's coming up in 72. There's a lot of things happening with Nixon. Once Watergate happens, which was in June of 72, even though it was happening before, but we find out about it. This is a perfect timing for John and Yoko to appear on a show like the Mike Douglas Show, because if it's too early, he's just starting out, figuring out how to get the message out there, and he'd been hanging out with Jerry Rubin.
Yes, that's a great point, Robbie. John himself may still have been into radical,
more radical.
A few months earlier. That's incredibly, yeah.
And 3 months later, or 4 months later, it's Watergate, and who knows how that would have played if he would have even brought it up, or would have been even invited. Maybe they would have been really scared.
Well, absolutely. I was just about to say that, because if I'm not mistaken, this predates, the appearance on Douglas pretty much entirely predates the deportation scenario.
They at the end of the movie, it says that the deportation started literally after the shows aired.
Yeah.
Right.
So the taping. So think about can you imagine, had the producers of the show not been able to get this together and couldn't get it to go down until, say, March? Yeah. Can you imagine what a terrified John Lennon would have brought to the screen, with essentially an air of censorship? John would have had to have watched everything he said, everything he did. The guests probably would have potentially been very different. What would have happened if the Douglas tapings happened after the deportation proceedings started.
Listen, here's something to think about. Sometime in New York City came out in June of 72. If that had come out being the album it was and the subject matter, I'm not so sure Mike Douglas's producer would have invited John and Yoko after June of 72.
I don't know.
They might have been too scared to have them on at that point, because now we're talking about maybe having on Angela Davis, and maybe they don't do macrobiotic food,
but
the
Mitch,
movement becomes a different movement.
Would Angela Davis have been Angela Davis, we know now, Angela Davis, an incredible woman. But so but where I'm going is that on the show, if they had given John that kind of freedom and they'd been able, and let's even take out the deportation idea.
Yeah.
And it was a few months later. Would Angela Davis have been any more of a risk than a Bobby Seale, other than the fact that Mike Douglas knew Bobby Seale?
No, but what I'm getting at is, it might not have been as diverse a week as it was, because they may not, they had the biofeedback and the macrobiotics and the vocal, the yellow pearl. If it had come out, if sometime in New York City had come out, maybe the week becomes more of every single day of a Angela Davis, Bobby Seale type, instead of having the diversity of everything in the movement of health and and bettering yourself. It might have not have been as diverse. That's all.
That's possible, but
Speculation.
But you do have to remember, and I just was quickly Googling this because I just didn't remember whether John had done whether they had done John Sinclair on Douglas, but they did do Luck of the Irish.
Yeah.
And they did do, I mean, he did It's So Hard, which isn't really a radical song.
Nah.
But look, even Imagine Itself had a little bit of its, but they did John Sinclair, and they did what did I just say? Luck of the Irish, and they did Sisters Oh Sisters. So they did two songs from, let's face it, middle of the afternoon. John wasn't stupid. They weren't gonna, Douglas may have acknowledged when they put out, Woman Is as the single.
Yeah.
And that may have, you're correct in that, I think, Mitch. I think that may have made the producers go, ugh.
Yeah, we're not going to do that.
We're not touching this with a barge pole. But you know what? John would have turned around and said, look, I'm no fool. I'm not going to ask you guys that we're going to play Woman Is at 4:30 in the afternoon.
Right.
I'm not. Let's reserve that. We'll do that on Cavett.
Yeah, well, that's what happened. And then, Cavett was told to read a disclaimer, and then no one complained.
And then, but what did Dick Cavett tell us? By the way, look up our Dick Cavett interview. It's really fun. Yeah. But and that was on the old show. That was on Fab Forum. But look up the Cavett interview. And what did Cavett say? I got more complaints about the mealy-mouthed excuse that I made, the mealy-mouthed apology, than I did about the performance. Well,
that's what happens, man.
Yeah.
Instead, we're going to do a great little ballad called "Working Class Hero."
There you go.
I liked the movie, what it was. I just wish, to me, this is a two-parter. I really think, especially with like I said, with the bumpers in it, this is a two-part show that would air on HBO.
Okay.
Type of thing where, it's like the two parts of Living in the Material World.
It won't do that, though.
I know they won't, but I do wonder, though, if they actually did that first, and then they said, okay, we have to have one movie instead of two parts. Because
I mean, Rob's got a point, though, Mitch. They could, if they broadcast this on one of the stations, it could conceivably, because I think it almost divides, not quite evenly, but I think intro day 1, day 2 almost ends at a halfway point.
Yes, it does.
But if you're on cable TV, they don't do that a lot.
I guess. Yeah.
On cable TV, they're going to show the whole 108 minutes, and it's going to be, and don't forget, it's going pretty much direct to DVD, right after the very limited theatrical release on John's birthday. So, it'll come out. They're going to want people to go buy the DVD, and Blu-ray, and if you stream, it'll probably be streaming at some point.
I'm sure.
Yeah, and as it should. But I liked it a lot. It gave a lot of context to the whole week. It gave me a newfound respect for the week, for Mike Douglas, for all of the guests, quite frankly. And this would be one that, I would buy on physical media,
Especially if there's any kind of bonus tracks.
right. And that's
If there's
thank
any
you for
music.
saying that, because I forgot to mention if you remember the week of the Douglas show, there's a question and answer period with John and Yoko.
Yes, stay on till the end of the movie.
Stay on till the
folks.
end of this, because
Yeah.
that's where it is, somewhat. And I wish there was more of that. I mean, I wish they would have maybe, because at one point he says, look, when first day or whatever day, we'll get to the Beatles during the end of the week. And then he asked about Beatles, but
Right.
John was it's not like Ringo where, you say to Ringo, we're not going to ask you any Beatle questions. He goes, oh, thank you. John was very receptive to everything. And even when Mike said, we're not going to ask you about it, John answers it. He says, he doesn't come back and say, well, let's save that for the end of the week.
Yeah. And I want to just, and I'm going to steal your thing, Rob. One more thing.
That's mine.
Wow.
We should have like a trademark. It should come up like registered on top. One more thing.
Right now, Bjorn Walk is spinning in his grave.
But one thing that I do want to toss in is that John's discussion of the Beatles at this point, again, not only are we coming off of Lennon Remembers and we're blowing that out of the water, but come on, everybody, we're just coming off of How Do You Sleep?
Right.
We're just coming off of the again, do the housewives in middle America at 4:30 in the afternoon know a lick about How Do You Sleep? Probably not.
No.
But the
or
Beatle fans
people.
or too many people, but the Beatle fans watching, the people who are aware of what John's going-ons were at that time, are watching a John, and I don't think he's BSing. I don't. He says, I spoke with Paul earlier in the week. I told him he's got to catch George because George is going to Bangladesh. You know what? Maybe John's making that up. I don't necessarily think he is.
He says it so matter-of-factly.
He says it so matter-of-factly. So you know what? Despite all of our How Do You Sleeps and our Too Many Peoples, whatever it is, you know what? This is a very, very real John Lennon, and this is unraveling that part of the mythos a little bit.
You know why I don't think he's good. I think he's very genuine about it and not making anything up, because at one point Mike Douglas says to him, is Paul still your best male friend? And he goes, well, maybe not. I don't see him that much. But so I don't think he's making any of it up. I think
he said best friend. He didn't say male friend. John's one who said male friend.
Right.
Because Yoko's there. Yoko's
right, but he does say best friend, but John then comes back with, well, yes, and then he goes, well, maybe not now, but because I don't see him as much. So I don't think he's BSing about the other part, because he's just, he was very open. He really was. So especially since what Rob said at the beginning of the show about, his answer about his dad. So right away, you could tell he was open to everything without having to hide anything, without having to feel or act mean-spirited about anything. And I don't think it was any, I think you're right. I think it was just a guy talking about his friends. And not having all the crap of the breakup right there.
No airs. No
airs about him, right.
So okay.
One more thing.
You mean one more?
My trademark, damn it.
One more thing.
One thing I just want to remind everyone, and Mitch mentioned in the beginning, the print on these TV shows, which are 525 NTCS SC, I'm sorry, look fabulous. They said there was a restoration. Now, video restoration is much harder than film restoration, because when an oxide falls off a tape, you can't fix it the way you fix film.
Right.
And everything we saw was fantastic. These weren't like 7th generation VHSs. These were, off the 1-inch masters. And I was very impressed with the quality. And I think this doesn't work if it looks like what we saw with One Hand Clapping.
Correct.
Because I think it would have taken away the whole presentation of what John and Yoko were doing on a daytime revolution. And it's very important. I was very happy to see the quality of the shows. I mean, let's get Mike Douglas on Antenna TV now with Johnny Carson,
I thought you were about to say, let's get Mike Douglas on the show.
And very importantly, Rob, if you think about it from the psychological perspective, people seeing that material in such good quality, it brings the relevance level up.
Yes,
for the average viewer in 2024.
Right, especially when everything's HD now and streaming and everything else. So
no disrespect meant to young people, but a lot of young people don't have patience for things that don't look crisp.
They don't like black and white movies.
It's dated.
So
this takes this stuff that isn't it amazing? I mean, Mitch and I were talking about this on the phone the other day, and we all brought this in, and Rob, especially with that normalizing concept, it's a 50-year-old, 50-plus-year-old piece of footage, piece of material that we were looking at here this whole week, and yet how much of it is now just day-to-day life stuff? Biofeedback,
you're right.
Macrobiotic food, hey, you know what? We still need changes to medicine and how we get our medicine and we still need, communities to be able to
the movement, so to speak, is still ongoing,
still alive. So, man, the revolution continues. That's what I say.
Just to not get better in the nighttime.
Yes, not get better. And very nice, Mitch. Mitch like the nighttime.
But if this was today, they would go on the Drew Barrymore show, or they'd go on,
right.
Kelly Clarkson.
Right. It would be, and think about it. That's a great point, Rob. It would be diluted so badly because there's so much now. There's so much now.
And also the other thing is the producers, if you ever notice, the shows are so produced now that, there's no breathing room where Mike Douglas can maybe ad-lib a question about John's father. Everything is thought out in advance. Oh, we're going to give you a trip to Disney World, or whatever they do on the show.
Yeah, John would be spinning a wheel for a trip, what I mean?
Yes. No, you're right. You're right. So it just the idea of the Mike Douglas show for what it was during that time is very important,
Maybe that's why we don't see people like Paul and Ringo on those shows. In all seriousness.
Well, Ringo is on what's her name, the cook,
Rachel Ray. Yeah,
Rachel Ray.
She's not on anymore. But what I'm saying is, I don't even think they were on like Ellen DeGeneres' show.
No, I don't remember that.
Maybe that's why. I mean, maybe they just don't feel like it's
and it's not just that, but here's something that, again, this whole hour that we've been chatting, we didn't put it in perspective for young people. They may know this, they may not. But here's the idea. First of all, part of the problem is you do, it's like anything else. You give one autograph, you've got to give 1,000.
Yeah.
You do one show.
Right.
Paul does one show, and now he's competing with the 800 other shows on every cockamamie cable channel and this channel and that channel and Hulu Plus and Paramount Plus, Netflix, all that insanity. 1971, here was the deal, folks. You had 3 networks, you had 3 channels to pick from, and you had a couple of local syndicated stations, which Mike was on, syndicated around the country.
Yeah.
But you had shows that carried stations that carried syndicated shows, and you had 3 networks. So when you sat down at 4:30 afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, you had 7 or 8, and if you lived in regions like upstate New York, maybe you had 4.
Yeah, you had maybe a local independent. One more thing, I mentioned the quality of the shows and the tapes. There's one thing I want to mention that it has nothing to do with anything, but has everything to do with the fact that these shows were saved, 52 years ago.
Yeah.
Back then, the networks weren't allowed to own their own programming, so they would record a show and then reuse the tape. Westinghouse Broadcasting owned the Mike Douglas show, they kept their shows because it was their property. They were allowed to own it. And Westinghouse was then bought out by CBS many years later. If this was a CBS show
We wouldn't
or
see
an
it.
NBC show, look at all the Johnny Carsons that got thrown away because they reused the tape or they weren't allowed to own it. Now they are. So
John
the
and
fact
Paul's
that,
appearance.
yeah,
Good point.
yeah,
Right.
just like when John and Paul were on the Tonight Show, that was thrown away.
Yeah.
So just think about the chance that it was Westinghouse Broadcasting and they kept the tapes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's nice that they did.
Well, the fact that they kept those tapes means that we now have something called Daytime Revolution.
Yep.
If you're catching this at its time of release and it's available to see it in the theater, I think it's worth seeing in the theater. I think if you can catch it in a theater, it's worth seeing on a big screen. I look forward to going to see it on the big screen. But of course, the DVD I'm sure will be available in perpetuity. Go and grab it. We have any other thoughts?
No, I enjoyed it. I highly recommend it.
I do too. I just wish it was. I think it can be and should be longer. And maybe there's a director's cut coming. We don't know.
Yeah.
And my other thought is, do the 5 shows come out? We know they came out on VHS, and you said they came out in South America or something on DVD, but they haven't been released here on DVD.
No.
I'm wondering if that, becomes a release down the road.
Absolutely. So
and you have to make sure one more thing. Mike Douglas had a 90-minute version and a 60-minute version. So some people might not have seen some of these people when they appeared because the 60-minute show, they're going to have all John and Yoko, but they might not have Yellow Pearl. I don't know if they were on the 60-minute, but
hence why there was always a second introduction.
Yes,
in the show to make up for whether they were doing the 60-minute or the 90-minute.
Yeah. Right. So that's
highly recommended.
Well, with all of that in mind, we hope you will go out and check out Daytime Revolution, and we hope you'll check out the other episodes of Fab 4 Free for All. And for this episode, I have been your moderator, Tony Chiguardo. Joining me, as thankfully they always do, my friends, Mr. Rob Leonard.
Thank you. Good show.
And Mr. Mitch Axelrod.
Take care, folks. Thank you.
We will see you all soon. Thanks for tuning in.
Fab 4 Free for All was edited and produced by Tony Chiguardo at Word of Mouth Studios in Westbury, New York.
The opening and closing theme is My Dolly by the band The Badge, featuring longtime listener Jeff Slate, available on its debut album Digital Retro and recent Best Of compilation, as well as from the Fab 4 Free for All website.
Thanks for listening to Fab 4 Free for All.